Most people who buy a bad rental property didn't buy a bad property. They bought a property without running the right numbers. There's a difference. A property that looks great at asking price can look terrible at a 7% mortgage rate. A property that pencils out beautifully with 95% occupancy falls apart at 80%. A property with strong cash flow today can become a cash drain the moment the roof needs replacing. None of these are surprises if you stress test the deal first. A stress test is exactly what it sounds like. You push the numbers to their breaking point before you commit any money, so you know exactly how much pain the property can absorb before it becomes a problem. Banks do this before lending money. Insurance companies do this before underwriting risk. As someone who owns rental properties, I do this before making any offer. Today I'm going to walk you through the exact framework, step by step. I'm POW. This is the house math. Let's get into it. There are 5 stress tests I run on every rental property before making an offer. Each one isolates a specific risk. Each one answers a specific question. A good deal passes all 5. A deal that fails even one needs to be either renegotiated or walked away from. Test 1. The vacancy test. What happens to your cash flow if the property sits empty longer than you planned? Test 2. The rate test. What happens if you had to refinance at a significantly higher interest rate? Test 3. The CapEx test. What happens if a major system fails in year 1 or year 2? Test 4. The rent decline test. What happens if rents in the market drop and you can't command what you're projecting? Test 5. The vacancy plus expense test. What happens if vacancy and expenses both run high at the same time? That last one is the real stress test. Individual problems are manageable. Simultaneous problems are what sink landlords. Let's run each one. Vacancy is the risk most new landlords underestimate. When a property analysis is presented to you by a seller, a broker, or a real estate influencer, it almost always assumes 100% occupancy. 12 months of rent, every year, no gaps. That's not reality. The national average vacancy rate for single-family rentals runs between 5 and 10% depending on the market. That's roughly 2 weeks to 5 weeks empty per year, after accounting for tenant turnover, time to find and screen new tenants, and any cosmetic work between leases. Here's how to run the vacancy test. Start with your projected monthly rent. Let's use $2,000 per month, $24,000 gross annual. Run it at 3 vacancy scenarios. 5% vacancy, 1 property showing month. Effective rent, $22,800 per year. 10% vacancy, roughly 5 to 6 weeks empty. Effective rent, $21,600 per year. 15% vacancy, a rough year with a difficult tenant. Effective rent, $20,400 per year. Now recalculate your full cost stack at each vacancy level. The stress test question is this: at 15% vacancy, a bad but plausible year, does the property still survive? Survive doesn't mean profit. It means you can cover all your obligations without going into personal funds beyond a reasonable emergency reserve. If a 15% vacancy year breaks the deal is too tight. Either negotiate the price down or walk away. A good rental property can absorb a 15% vacancy year and keep standing. The rate test asks a simple question. If you had to refinance this property at a rate 2% higher than today, does the deal still work? This matters for 2 reasons. Reason 1, you may need to refinance. Life happens. Cash out refinances. Rate adjustments on ARMs. Partnership buyouts. Situations arise where you're back at the lender's table. Reason 2, you may be buying in a low-rate environment and not accounting for what the deal looks like across all rate cycles it will live through. On a $240,000 mortgage at 5%, monthly payment equals $1,288. At 6%, monthly payment equals $1,439. At 7%, monthly payment equals $1,597. At 8%, monthly payment equals $1,761. At 9%, monthly payment equals $1,931. The difference between a 5% and a 9% rate on this loan is $643 per month, $7,716 per year. The stress test question: at today's rate plus 2%, does the property still cover its obligations? If you're buying at 7% and the deal barely works, an 8% rate scenario shouldn't be catastrophic. If it is, the deal has no margin of safety. This test also reveals how dependent the deal is on the current rate environment. A deal that only works at historically low rates is not a robust deal. It's a rate-dependent bet. Capital expenditures, CapEx, are the large, infrequent expenses that don't show up in a monthly budget but hit like a freight train when they do. Roof replacement, HVAC system, water heater, flooring, foundation issues, electrical panel, plumbing, windows, siding. Every property has a CapEx clock ticking. The question is whether you know when it expires. Before making any offer, get a professional home inspection and specifically ask the inspector to estimate the remaining useful life of the roof. Typical lifespan 20 to 30 years. The HVAC system. Typical lifespan 15 to 20 years. The water heater. Typical lifespan 10 to 15 years. The electrical panel, age and capacity. The plumbing, type of pipes and condition. This gives you a CapEx timeline, a rough schedule of when each major system is likely to need replacement. Here are ballpark replacement costs to plug into your stress test. Roof, $8,000 to $18,000. HVAC system, $5,000 to $12,000. Water heater, $1,000 to $2,500. Electrical panel, $2,000 to $4,000. Full flooring, $5,000 to $15,000. The stress test question for CapEx: what if the roof or HVAC fails in year 1 or year 2? Can you absorb a $12,000 unexpected expense on top of your normal operating costs without it becoming a crisis? If not, either negotiate a price reduction that accounts for the deferred maintenance, require seller concessions to replace the system before closing, or factor the replacement cost into your offer price. A property with a 5-year-old roof is worth more than the same property with a 22-year-old roof. The math should reflect that difference. Rent projections are almost always optimistic. They're based on current market rents, which are a snapshot of today, not a guarantee of tomorrow. Rents can decline. They declined in many markets during 2023 and 2024. They declined sharply during COVID in urban markets. They decline when new supply enters a market. They decline when a major local employer leaves. The rent decline stress test. What does your cash flow look like if market rents drop 10 to 15%? On a $2,000 per month rental, 10% decline, rent drops to $1,800, $2,400 less per year. 15% decline, rent drops to $1,700, $3,600 less per year. Recalculate your full cost stack at each rent level. The stress test question: at 15% below current market rent, can you still cover the mortgage and operating costs? If yes, the deal has real margin. If no, you're underwriting to perfection. And perfection doesn't show up in real estate very often. 2 practical protections against rent decline. 1. Buy in a market with strong underlying demand drivers. Job growth, population growth, supply constraints. These markets have structural floors under rents that softer markets don't. 2. Lock in strong tenants on longer leases. A 24-month lease at today's rent protects you from a 12-month decline window. Tenant quality and lease structure are your primary hedges against rent risk. The first 4 tests isolate individual risks. This one combines them. Because in the real world, bad things have a tendency to cluster. A tenant leaves, the unit sits vacant. While it's vacant, you find the HVAC needs replacing. And the rental market has softened, so when you re-lease it, you get less than before. That's not a horror story. That's a moderately bad year for a landlord. Here's the combined stress test on our $300,000 property. Normal scenario assumptions. Rent, $2,000 per month. $24,000 per year. Vacancy, 8%. Effective rent, $22,800. Expenses as modeled in video 6. Combined stress scenario, rent $1,800 per month. 10% market decline. Vacancy 15%. Difficult tenant turnover year, unexpected CapEx. $8,000 roof repair, everything else at normal levels. Normal scenario, annual cash flow, approximately minus $10,000. Combined stress scenario, annual cash flow, approximately minus $26,000. That's a $16,000 swing in a single bad year. The stress test question: do you have $26,000 in accessible reserves, cash, or liquid assets to absorb a combined stress year without selling the property, missing mortgage payments, or going into personal debt? If yes, you're capitalized appropriately for the risk. If no, you are undercapitalized for what you're buying. This is the most important number in the entire stress test framework, not the cap rate, not the projected cash flow. How much runway do you have when everything goes wrong at once? Professional real estate investors typically hold 6 to 12 months of total property expenses and liquid reserves per property. That number should tell you something about how seriously they take this risk. Now that we have 5 stress tests, here's how to use them to make the actual buy decision. Rule 1. All 5 tests must pass. Not 4 out of 5. All 5. Each test is isolating a different failure mode. A deal that fails any single test has a known vulnerability. Rule 2. Score each test on margin. A test that barely passes is different from one that passes easily. Track how much cushion you have on each test. A property that passes the vacancy test by $200 per month is a tighter deal than one that passes by $800. Margin of safety matters. Rule 3. Failed tests are negotiating leverage. A roof that fails the CapEx test is an argument for a lower purchase price, not necessarily a reason to walk away. Use the stress test results to inform your offer. If the combined stress test shows you need $26,000 in reserves, and the asking price leaves you with $15,000, you know exactly how much price reduction you need to be appropriately capitalized. Good deal passes all 5 tests with meaningful margin. Combined stress year is survivable with normal reserves. CapEx timeline has no major items in years 1 through 3. Tight deal passes all 5 tests, but barely. Requires near perfect execution to work. Very sensitive to any individual variable going wrong. Only appropriate for experienced landlords with strong cash reserves. Bad deal fails 1 or more tests at the stated purchase price. Either renegotiate to a price where it passes, or walk away. There will be another property. Here's the honest summary. Most rental property mistakes happen before closing, not after. They happen when someone underwrites to best case assumptions instead of stress testing the deal. The 5 tests we ran today, vacancy, rate, CapEx, rent decline, and combined, are not designed to find reasons to avoid buying. They're designed to find out exactly how much risk you're taking on, so you can price it correctly, capitalize appropriately, and make the decision with open eyes. A deal that survives all 5 stress tests with meaningful margin is a deal worth buying. A deal that only works in the best case scenario is not an investment. It's a bet. And as we've established on this channel, we know a thing or two about the difference between bets and investments. Next video, we move into personal finance, and we look at the hidden math inside your 30-year mortgage. The number that surprises almost everyone when they see it for the first time. Subscribe so you don't miss it. I'm POW. This is the House Math. See you next week.